Welcome to our Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today's date is Tuesday, February 2nd. We appreciate your interest in our city government, whether you be here in Carnegie or watching on CityLink. We have an interesting agenda, a couple interesting presentations today, so I think you'll be happy to be involved in our government watching today. We'll begin our meeting with City Council open discussion. Councilors? Councilor Jamison.
I've got a couple items. First, fiscal committee meets after the executive session that we'll have after this meeting. It shouldn't be too long, but Dave Bixler, our budget analyst, is going to give us some budget review information, right? So stick around for that if you're interested. And then a couple other things, if I could, real quick, hopefully. Recently, we got an update on the estimated population growth in the community. And I don't know if in that discussion there was ever a number about the daytime population that the city of Sioux Falls has. You know what I mean? There's a lot of communities that come into Sioux Falls to work, and let alone just our regular population. But I wonder if it'd be interesting or good for developers who are looking to prospect to businesses to come to know what our daytime population is. I have no idea, I could guess, but I think that'd be a great number for us to know. And I don't know if there's a way to ever figure it out, but just something that struck my head when I learned of the new number for the city. One other thing is the event center. I won't do it a quiz, but I mean, we built our event center for all of us, right? To have a great time, improve our quality of life. Nobody would probably argue about that. But these ticket sales and these scalpers or these brokers that are buying these tickets, I mean, it's our event center. What about an idea or at least a conversation about limiting the scope, the distance of where those tickets could be purchased? I mean, I don't know if that's out of order or not, but it's our event center. I mean, it was built for us to use, the people in this region. And if we have a way to control the way the tickets are sold, it might be something to consider so that all of us have a better chance of going to it. I don't know what those rules would be, but I think it'd be a healthy discussion to find out what can be done, what could be done. So I just wanted to stir the pot a little bit on that topic if there's any further discussion that maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't remember the ordinance that we passed, but we tried to do something like that, didn't we?
It was on scalping. That's
yeah,
within the
that
distance.
scalping's illegal, or I can't remember what it's about, but obviously it's been ineffective.
Right, but I've heard like even the director, Terry Torgelson, say, yeah, there's a concert coming up, and the tickets haven't gone on sale, but you can buy tickets online from somebody. And he doesn't understand how that could be.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's a lot of places that are taking advantage of the opportunities here that aren't even ever, I mean, they're using it as a profit center.
Well, sure.
And I just hate to see us lose it as our quality of life opportunity. So if there's ever a way to get that further discussion, maybe I'll carry that with Terry myself.
Councilor Anderson?
Two things, I guess. Number one, on the population, I'd also like to see the greater Sioux Falls area population, because as we grow, we know that all those other communities are growing along with us. So I'd like to see that posted with the city's numbers. And then on the ticket sales, I've also spoken with Terry about this a couple different times. And after some discussion, you know, it's that internet sales and those phone sales that are where they're making those inroads as far as purchasing those tickets. And I'm not sure if there's a program out there. Maybe we'll need to talk to our IT director and then Terry's people to see if there's a program that could identify a phone number, and after it calls two, three times, stop that call from happening. It's just like those robocalls. It's an automatic system that goes out and it makes the purchases, and and boom, we lose, you know, maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 tickets that could be sold to our citizens at the normal cost, and then they're reselling them through the internet and that so that they avoid our scalping regulations. So I think that's probably what we'd have to look at in this case.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, first of all, I hesitate to micromanage something that we put in the hands of a management company and told them to make money. I struggle with stepping in and saying, yeah, but don't do it that way, only do it the way that we want it to do. So, but the other thing I would say, and I haven't talked to Terry directly, but I have read, you know, and paid attention to local news, and 125,000 people tried to buy 12,000 seats. So at some point, somebody's not going to get a seat. And yeah, bummer, but that's the way it works. And in the day of, you know, there used to be a day when we all, you know, you'd find out that that concert was coming and everybody'd be in line on Saturday morning with their $25 in hand, and who got there, got there. Those days are gone. You know, you got to spend time on the internet, and it takes like that to buy a ticket, but sometimes if you're not the first one in there, this is the way it works. It's a little different than what we kind of grew up with, and I guess I'd like to see this system kind of work itself out, and I'd like to see us not micromanage things that we've said we want to make money with.
Councilor Kiley.
Well, I think there's enough interest in this topic here among the council as well as the public based on what we're hearing and what we're reading. But for me personally, it's basically what I know about it is what I'm hearing and what I'm reading, and is everything that I'm hearing and reading accurate? And I'd rather get that information directly from Terry, so maybe that's a future informational session, and I would just suggest that we look into that.
That would be my recommendation, to have contact Terry Torkelson and just have him come in and have that discussion with us so we can ask these questions, because there is a lot of speculation, innuendo, whatever out there, whether it be on Facebook or wherever. I mean, you hear people saying different things and you don't know what's true and what's not true. So I think it'd be a great place to start. Councilor Staggers.
And also, I think at the same time, maybe we ought to try to encourage the management out there to maybe have, instead of just one concert, see if they can maybe book 2 concerts of the same group, because if we have such demand, I mean, we should be making tons of money.
Might be a good recommendation for Terry. I know the promoter has a lot to do with that, but yeah.
Terry has looked into that, yes,
Okay.
just to respond to that in our discussions. He has stated that they've looked into having
Garth
multiple.
Brooks had about 6 or 7 concerts.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And they're even doing that in larger venues too. I've seen that for the real popular shows.
okay. Any other open discussion? All righty then. We will move into our first presentation. Top 10 projects update. Kendra Simmonsma, our senior or chief project manager?
You can call me whatever you would like. Counselor Karski, that's perfectly fine. Good afternoon.
I'll stay away from senior then.
Kendra Simmons, my Chief Project Manager from the City of Sioux Falls Mayor's Office. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to give you guys an update on our top 10 projects and all of the successes that we accomplished in 2014. And then I'll also provide just a little bit of an exciting news as well that helps with the overall function of project management with the City of Sioux Falls. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. There was roughly, and what I'll go through today is 6 significant major project goals or accomplishments that we achieved in 2014 on the top 10 list, and I'll go through each one of them. And then also the other major announcement today is that we have realigned our project management team within the city to help just maximize the project management resources, and so I'll talk a little bit more details on that. So these are not in any particular order. The next 6 things I'm going to talk about, it just is how the slide deck got put together. So I don't want to minimize any of the goals that were achieved. But I'll first start with our land management EnerGov software implementation project. Like all software projects, and really any projects really, software is always very difficult to manage through. It's a significant amount of change. And with this project specifically, we were out to seek for increased functionality and streamline our work processes for the land management systems. We reported previously on this project that we were using many different systems to manage our land management data, and that just became really inefficient. And so I'm happy to say that in September of 2014, we were able to, as in software you say, go live. We were able to go live with our new land management system, where everyone now, all the city departments had access to the same information all within one system. And that obviously then helps us become more productive in the work that we do and how we service the citizens of Sioux Falls and ultimately our customers. There's more robust reporting in this new system, which again, because we had disparate systems before, it was very difficult to get data down to the level of, we could tell you how many roof permits now we were issuing before, where previously we were only able to tell you how many permits were issued. Now we're able to get down to a much granular level. And then just so you know that since the system's gone live, we've issued over 7,000 permits, and that's just not including planning and building services, but that includes people in our health department, fire rescue, and our public works team. So it really is a system that's being used across the city, and we do believe that it's helping us better manage and serve our customers. All of you know that we reached a major milestone with the event center opening, as Councilor Jamieson and all of you just had a discussion about the success and the demand of our tickets. Our goal was to build a multi-purpose facility, so not only to hold concerts, but I'm sure some of you are aware of the farm show that happened and that utilized flat floor space, and so we're really excited that that accomplishment happened last year. Substantial completion, there's a typo on this slide, I want to publicly say that. Substantial completion was achieved on August 1st, not August 8th. The grand opening concert was Jason Aldean on October 3rd, and since then, for the last 4 months, we've held numerous types of events, not just concerts, and private bookings have been hosted there and have also been announced. And so we look forward to SMG continuing to really book that facility and use it as a multi-purpose space. Another one of our major achievements from the top 10 projects that we worked on was developing a 2025 downtown plan. And that's a continuation of a vision update for the downtown area. One of the things that was different with this project, though, and that we're really proud of, is that we really did go out of our way to utilize significant input from the public. And as you can see on your slide, there's stats about how many work group meetings. We had 50 citizen work group meetings. We held 6 different public meetings. We received over 1,700 survey responses from the community. And because of all of that, we were able to put together an action plan that establishes 13 goals with close to 60 action items. You all adopted the plan in December of this last year, and we look forward to moving forward on the implementation of that plan. Another major initiative that was completed in 2014 was the renovation of the City Hall ground floor. The main objective and benefit that we see with this project is that we were able to relocate and reinstall a new permit counter for the citizens to come in and utilize, and you can see that in the lower left side of the screen. We also were able to centralize our planning and building services team, our zoning, our property maintenance, and our code enforcement team all on one space, all on one floor. And that really helps with internal team collaboration. I know that sounds kind of like a fluffy thing to do, but it really does help when you can just get up and walk across the room and talk to somebody versus getting on the phone or emailing. So we're really proud of that we were able to centralize those teams because they work so closely together. And then the last big win for this project was that we were able to standardize our workspace, the furniture, and how we configure things. And so that going forward for future growth and flexibility, we'll use those same standardization of furniture for future renovations and build-outs. Another one of our major achievements from last year, and I'm not sure how much you were aware of this or not, but in 2014, we, under the leadership of Regan Smith, we went through an exercise to actually develop continuity plans and continue to prepare ourselves to handle disasters. We all remember the ice storm, but there's other things that occur that we want to be prepared for the city to respond appropriately. And so Regan Smith went out to all of the departments and made sure that we developed continuity plans. 23 continuity plans were developed. And it's a big milestone because, in general, no one wants to talk about continuity operations unless it's actually happening to you. So for the departments and the subject matter experts, along with Regan and his team, to actually sit down and write valid continuity operation plans, that was a major win for us, and we have that now. We also then, it's not only written down in paper, but then we exercised them. We did a tabletop exercise, and we conducted validation tests to make sure the plans were valid. So for things like, hey, we lost an email server, what would we do to maintain services? those types of exercise we went through. And it's a really good internal thing that we did. It doesn't help anyone today, but it will help everyone when there is a disaster or an incident that we have to respond to. The slide also mentions that we continue to provide incident command training for our team members and the city directors. Again, we learned a lot from our response to the ice storm that we had, and our teams did a great job under Regan Smith's leadership, and we're just continuing to educate our leadership teams on how to respond and how do we handle incident command training. And then the last thing is that we did also do an emergency operations center exercise. You know that we stand up emergency operations centers more than just things like an ice storm. They're sometimes stood up for a thing like there was a public works incident with a fire in the manholes, if you guys remember that. So there's purposes beyond just a major community event. So we practice that as well. So we feel really good about this project. The last major initiative that was achieved last year was a focus on an internal process for our code enforcement teams. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is that code enforcement doesn't happen by one person, it doesn't happen by two people. It's actually a team of people that involves many departments, the health department, the fire department, as well as planning and zoning, our attorneys, building services, community development, public works, and police. So it's many people involved in our code enforcement process. And what we did last year was to really make sure we formalized that team, we formalized communication, we formalized how issues would be escalated and resolved. And then with that, you can see a screenshot. We created some internal reports to help us as we communicate between departments to make sure cases didn't get dropped or lost in the shuffle. And so this, again, was a big win internally for us to be able to better serve the citizens of Sioux Falls and the customers who depend on the code enforcement process. The last major accomplishment that I want to share with you today is that in the summer of 2014, we made a conscious effort project managers, which includes myself, Aaron Bonfinkamp from the Public Works team, and Deborah Gajkowski from the planning team. We made a conscious effort to reorganize us, the three project managers, into one team to better align our resources and to make sure that the three project managers for the City of Sioux Falls are supporting all of the major initiatives and not just things that are coming out of planning and not the things that are coming out of public works. We're really trying to do more of a comprehensive support across all of the 12 departments to make sure that project management methodologies are utilized where it's appropriate. And so Aaron and Deborah are both here as well, and I just wanted to take this time just to recognize that there wasn't any increase in staff or any increase in cost. It was just a realignment. And then, of course, just to mention that not only do the three of us maintain the top 10 projects, but a lot of individual staff resources all support the top 10 project list. And so some of the things I've listed, I mentioned Regan Smith. Kevin Smith was involved in the code enforcement project. Dustin Powers was involved in the 2025 downtown plan. So the three project managers do support as much as we can, and then we rely on the rest of the staff from the departments to continue out those practices. This is just a summary slide of what I just went through, of the wins that I wanted to share with you today. And that leaves me with just this last slide to just give you a snapshot of what we're currently working on from the top 10 perspective. And again, this, first of all, is in no particular priority order, and it does not mean that these are the only projects that we're working on. But just to go down the list rather quickly, the 2025 downtown plan was a plan that we completed last year. Now our focus is to implement those plans and those action items. And so community development and planning are getting together to put together a project team for that. So we'll be working on implementation activities this year. We are continuing to renovate City Hall, and we're working on our second floor space as we speak. Bids, I believe, went out earlier in January, which I think they were favorable, and we hope to be moved and transitioned into that new space at the end of the summer. The event center still stays on our list because not only are we continuing to work through the metal siding issue, but we want to be able to address any of the other maintenance issues that are going on. We have a 1-year warranty on many items, and so we continue to live in our building and make sure that we're addressing those issues. You guys know about the Indoor Aquatic Center. I was here as part of a team last Informational to give you an update on that project. The Land Management EnerGov implementation software project is still not complete. We hit a major milestone in September, but we're working on a phase 2 implementation that will actually give citizens access to online permitting. So you no longer would have to come in to City Hall to get a permit. You can get one online. And then also part of phase 2 would be to allow developers and others who submit plans, and they have to get comments back from the city on any changes that they need for their plans, to do that online as well. So those 2 major functionalities are scheduled for later this year. We continue to work on the railroad redevelopment. You all know that the City of Sioux Falls right now is in negotiations to sell and buy the land from Burlington Northern. You also all know that there's nothing more I can say on that. The subdivision annexation project, we have identified over 50 land areas within the city or our growth areas that we are targeting for annexation. And so now the team is working through a prioritization of that. And so that's just, again, another initiative that the city continues to work on. The organizational assessment project, you saw a contract for a consultant called LMI coming in to do an organizational assessment review on the City of Sioux Falls. And what we're asking them to do is a macro level look on the way that we are structured and aligned to make sure that we're prepared for all the growth, the population growth that we saw, and to make sure that we are maximizing our organization the most efficient way we can. So we expect LMI to come back with their results this year, this spring, and then an implementation plan would follow. The downtown parking ramp and redevelopment area or development area, we have submitted requests for interest for private developers to engage us. We plan to do an RFP later this spring, and that's really to help us build a new parking ramp along with some private development around it. The need in our parking system is that we're around 85% capacity to date, and we want to be prepared so that we don't ever have to tell somebody who wants to move downtown and have parking for their employers that we don't have space for them. So we're in the process of planning and designing and then ultimately building a new parking ramp, and we want to see if we can get any private development to go along in partnership with that. And then the last project that's on this list that we're working through right now through 2015 is a financial management process improvement project. And what we're trying to do there is look at all of the financial activity that goes on within the city, in all of the departments, and make sure that we are utilizing the most efficient ways to manage and control, and that there are audit checks in place, that we're streamlining any of those financial transactions. That's being led out of our finance team. And so that project is fairly new in scope, and we're just working through the project team and the development of that. So those are the top 10 projects that we're currently working on. And that's all I have for you. Certainly, I'm here to answer any questions. And for anything specific that I cannot answer, I know several of the project managers that led those projects that I walked through quickly are here as well.
Councilor Jameson, you have a question? Thank you, Kendra.
Kendra, if you could, I know Deborah, but if you could point out Deborah and Aaron.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you guys want to stand up and wave?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Kendra, you have down substantial completion of the event center on August 1st.
Yes.
When can we put final in front of that completion?
Sure. Once all of the building inspections have been final completed, and I believe Councilor Staggers are waiting on the landscaping, which happens in the spring.
Oh, the landscaping? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So let me get back to you specifically on that, but that's one of the outstanding checks.
Okay. Actually, I thought you were going to say, well, we're still trying to determine what's going to happen to the siding. Is there any
that doesn't have to do with substantial completion or final completion. That's the final completions are dealing with safety and building codes.
Okay. And do you know anything about when we will know about the siding issue?
Unfortunately, I don't. I can't report anything today. I'm sorry. I don't know. We're continuing to work through the process to resolve the issue. We're continuing to have Mortensen work through the process to resolve the issue. They have up to a year to cure, is the legal term I've been told, to cure the issue with their subcontractors.
And that's supposed to be in May, is it? Or Do you remember the date?
August 1st would be substantial completion, so they would have technically a year from August 1st of 2014.
Okay. And then also, if I could ask, you mentioned that you formalized the code enforcement team. How many people are on that team now?
I'm looking for Kevin Smith. But let me check my notes here.
Okay.
We have representatives from, I would say 6 members at this point are on the standing team, and they represent the planning and zoning areas, the attorney's office, our public health, our building services area, and fire prevention area.
Okay, and most of those people can give out tickets, is that right? The 6 people, or how does that work?
I'm sorry, Counselor, I can't answer that question. We need to follow up with Kevin Smith on that.
Okay.
All righty. Looks like we're done with questions. Thank you,
Can I
Kendra.
ask one other quick question?
Counselor?
Yeah, you mentioned that people are going to be able to go online and purchase permits and things like that. I just assume they'd be able to use credit cards and so forth, is that right?
I'm sure that will be part of the process, but that's not something that will be available until later this year when we roll out that implementation. Certainly, I can defer to Deborah. Deborah Kajkowski is the project manager. She's saying yes, payment credit cards will be available.
So when you talk about city services, what % do you think can be paid with credit cards? Any idea? I mean, seems to be the way, society is going. And
Sure. I don't have that data in front of me, Counselor, but I definitely would say, just by rule of thumb, yes, that's where society is going.
Now we're good. Thank you again,
Thank you so
Kendra.
much.
To you and your team, appreciate it. We're going to before we begin our next presentation, I am going to be recusing myself, and just as a quick explanation to the council and to the public so they know why a counselor would be stepping out during such an important topic, because I have to recuse myself from this, the first and second reading. I was on the selection committee for the ambulance, and because of a South Dakota Supreme Court ruling that because I took part of this process and was party to information that was not public and not able to be shared with the rest of you, I will not be voting on this to respect the integrity of the process. So just so you know, I'm not shirking my duties, and I respect what you're going to be doing here, and I'll be paying attention. So, Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Councilor Karski. Our next item on the agenda is the ambulance service agreement. We will start the presentation with Jill Franken, our Public Health Director, and David Fleifley, the City Attorney.
Pleases the chair, we'll go a little bit with me first and then Jill Franken, if that's all right. Good afternoon, councilors. Thought I'd just lay a bit of the legal landscape regarding the ambulance RFP prior to going into more of the substantive issues that will be far better explained by Jill Franken. As you are aware, the city had issued a request for proposals, which we have an acronym for, RFP. Throughout this process, you'll hear the RFP acronym used, so please bear with us. Following the November 5th notice of intent to award the contract to Paramedics Plus LLC, there was a bid protest filed. One of the proposers had filed that bid protest pursuant to city procedure. It went to Tracy Turback, the finance director, who denied the bid protest. Then it went on to an appeal in front of an independent hearing examiner, and she also recently ruled and denied the bid protest. That bid protest has now been appealed to State Circuit Court. To lay the landscape a little bit in terms of bid protests, the disappointed bidder or proposer has to prove that there was some favoritism, fraud, or corruption in the process that didn't allow them to obtain the winning proposal. The South Dakota Supreme Court has held repeatedly that public agencies have wide latitude to select the best provider when issuing an invitation for proposals. And the Supreme Court has specifically said that the courts will not interfere with a local government's discretion. I think it's rather telling that just this past Thursday, there was a bid protest appeal determined by the South Dakota Supreme Court. And it involved the city of Hot Springs. And Hot Springs had issued a request for proposals regarding the use of some of its property. And one of the disappointed bidders brought a bid protest, demanded an injunction be issued, demanded that the bid protest be upheld. The state trial court held no injunction would issue, granted summary judgment to the city of Hot Springs, and on appeal and in an issue decision of this Thursday, the state Supreme Court affirmed that trial court's ruling. So again, I think the legal landscape is such that these bid protests are basically frowned upon by the courts, and chances are low that they'd have a likelihood of success. Comments have been made about the independent hearing examiner that was used in this instance, Michelle Chrisman. She is a retired state magistrate court judge. To give you an idea how one becomes a state magistrate judge, they are selected through an extensive interview and background check by the other circuit court judges within that circuit. So our circuit is the Second Circuit. All 10 of those judges would have been involved in the background check, in the interview process, and would have selected her to be a magistrate court judge. Before she is allowed to hear one case, she also has to achieve the approval of the South Dakota Supreme Court. So I think it's clear to say that in her prior life as a judge, Michelle Chrisman gained the faith, confidence of our judiciary. Michelle Chrisman was selected pursuant to an RFP process, coincidentally, by the city, and on that review panel included a retired state court justice, as well as a city councilor who was then Vernon Brown, who was still sitting on the council. Michelle Chrisman was a unanimous selection for being an independent hearing examiner for the city. It is true that she is paid, I guess, by the city, by the hour to do that work, but so are all of you paid to sit here, $18,000 a year. If you take that argument any further, you are saying that none of you are allowed to sit on any case or decision involving the city. Judges on the state level or the federal level routinely hear about half of their caseload is involving the government that technically issues their paycheck. So courts have determined time and time again that is not a reason for bias. And in fact, the exact opposite is true here. Prior to the hearing, we were alerted by the attorneys for the disappointed bidder, MedStar, that their law firm had done work for Judge Chrisman's family, and the city waived that potential conflict because we were confident, based on her reputation, she would render a fair and reasoned decision, which she did. Again, there is no stay in place here. There is nothing preventing you from going forward. I know there's been comments in the media about there's an ordinance that provides that there's a stay. Well, that ordinance, as you will recall, was back from 2011 regarding administrative enforcement actions. And it specifically deals with the fact that the city will not issue any additional fines or penalties if someone has appealed from an administrative enforcement action. It has nothing to do with this council's ability to act, to adopt an ordinance, to provide a franchise. The public needs and rightfully demands that ambulance service be provided on a continuous basis, 24/7, 365. The current contract ends at midnight on May 20th, 2015. There's nothing preventing you from acting at this time. There's also been allegations in the public media about some antitrust violations, claiming that the city can't grant an exclusive franchise here, that we have to have market competition, etc. All these statements do not address a clear exception to the antitrust laws under both federal and state law, where an antitrust is where you can't create a monopoly. There is a key exception recognized long ago by our United States Supreme Court. It's called the state action exception. What that means is when a state statute creates a licensing and regulatory scheme such that a municipality, such as us, is acting upon that scheme, they're exempt from the antitrust laws. Now, in 1967, our state legislature passed the state statute SDCL 34-11-1, which allows us as a city to either run our own ambulance service or to contract with one or more parties to provide that service. Your city ordinance, section 124.081, specifically provides the city shall grant an exclusive franchise for providing ground ambulance transport services within the city as the official policy and regulatory scheme of the city for ground ambulance services. The city has been providing a, sorry, I've got a cold, heavily medicated. The city has been providing an exclusive franchise for many years. Rural Metro has held that for at least 20 years, so this is not something suddenly new and different within the city. It is ironic that the entity that is now claiming antitrust violations is MedStar, who has the exclusive contract in Brandon to provide emergency ambulance services. And MedStar has the ambulance license exclusively for an exclusive operating area in Minnehaha County. Now, the city has twice defended antitrust actions in the past related on this very same exclusive franchise agreement. There was a case from the early 1980s involving an entity called Federal Ambulance who came in. I believe they were awarded the contract for the Veterans Administration transports, which are excluded from our contract and ordinance, but also they wanted to expand and provide services throughout the city of Sioux Falls. We would not grant them a license. They brought this case to court on antitrust violations. The city was successful in that. And also, in 1993, there was a case brought by CareTrom Ambulance Incorporated, whose owner is the same owner that now owns MedStar Paramedic Ambulance Service. And in that case, the city was also successful on the antitrust claim. The seminal case in the entire United States is a case involving what's called the Gold Cross Ambulance Service versus the city of Kansas City, Missouri. This was an 8th Circuit Court of Appeals decision. The 8th Circuit is a federal appeals court that is right below the United States Supreme Court. Now, the 8th Circuit noted that the city of Kansas City was having problems with response times and lack of service for emergency transports for ambulance service within the city. And this was back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. The 8th Circuit, based on the trial court taking tons of testimony and evidence regarding the nature of the ambulance industry, made the following specific findings regarding that emergency calls were being neglected because of the nature of the ambulance business. And I quote, "This incentive to neglect emergency service arises from the cost structure of the ambulance business. The fixed cost of providing emergency service is very high because expensive advanced life support equipment is required and because sufficient capacity to meet peak demand within an adequate response time must be maintained, even though that full emergency capacity is seldom utilized. In contrast, the cost of handling non-emergency ambulance service with the idle excess capacity is low. Moreover, the fee collection rate for non-emergency service is substantially higher than for emergency service. Thus, non-emergency calls are significantly more profitable than emergency calls, and private ambulance companies operating in an unregulated market have a strong incentive to concentrate on providing non-emergency service rather than quick, high-quality emergency care. Based on the problems that they were experiencing with response times for emergency calls, which are threatening the public health, safety, and welfare, the city of Kansas City adopted the same scheme that we now have in terms of providing a single provider for all ambulance transports originating and culminating or ending within the city. The other private ambulance companies that weren't awarded that contract brought suit to the 8th Circuit. The 8th Circuit specifically discussed the public utility model regarding how we do it as well. The The Eighth Circuit agreed that the private ambulance companies had no unilateral right to the ambulance contract. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals found there were no antitrust violations and there were no other constitutional violations. As a result of that decision, many communities across the country have adopted exclusive franchise contracts for ambulance service. RFPs are issued across the country, providing competition for the market of providing ambulance service rather than competition within the market. Like Kansas City, our exclusive operating area is for emergency and non-emergency calls, and it excludes, as I indicated, the government contracts such as the Veterans Administration, and also pursuant to state law, it doesn't include the ground transport component of an air ambulance service. So if someone is being transported in the ground leg as part of an air ambulance service, it's not covered. An antitrust claim would have a very low likelihood of success here. Not only has the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is again just below the U.S. Supreme Court, ruled this way, and that's our region governing our laws, it's also been followed by the Fifth Circuit as well as the Ninth Circuit Courts of Appeals. So basically all the federal courts have come in unison saying that the antitrust statutes do not apply when we're talking about ambulance service, when you have a state exception where the state statute is providing the municipality the ability to license and regulate ambulance service. As I'd mentioned previously, CareTrom, which was also owned by Jay Major, who owns MedStar, brought a claim in federal district court here in South Dakota back in 1993. Then federal Judge Jones heard the same arguments that they're basically making today. In essence, Judge Jones came down and ruled that our state statute indicates that it's a state licensing and regulatory scheme such that the state action exception applies, meaning we can license, and any licensing reasonably has the anticipated effect of anti-competitive effect, meaning excluding some from that area or all others. Our state Supreme Court has only issued one decision regarding the antitrust statutes, and in a similar statutory scheme, something different but related to public health, the state Supreme Court said when a municipality has the right to license and regulate something, it has the right to issue 75% or even 100% of that particular market to only one provider. So I think we have certainly a very low likelihood of success here. With that, I'm going to let Jill Franken talk. I'm sorry, Counselor, yes?
I was going to ask if there was any questions for you first.
Okay, very good, very good.
Is there any questions from any of the council? Councilor Staggers, you look like
Yeah,
you're ready.
I do. I was going to wait until the end here, but well, maybe I'll just ask Jill. If I could,
Well,
if we could
I
possibly.
just wanted to do anything that would be associated with the city attorney has just presented to us, and then we'll let Jill present. and
Sure,
then-
but then after Jill, and
Yes.
we can still come back and ask
Yes,
Dave
sir.
questions. Okay, yeah.
I'll stick around, Counselor.
Any other council members? Okay, thank you, David.
Good afternoon, Jill Franken, Public Health Director with the City of Sioux Falls. Thanks for having us here this afternoon. I know I have a lot of information to cover, as did City Attorney Fifley, so I'll do my best to get through this, but it is going to take a little bit because we've had a lot of work to do over the last at least 2 years. So when I look at what we're going to be accomplishing today, I'm going to just talk through the preparation that we did to get ready for this RFP process and talk a little bit about the project team. I'm going to talk a little bit about your participation as a council and the communications we've had with you. I'm going to review the stakeholder input that informed us as we prepared to write this RFP, the RFP design and process, and how we actually engaged in that work and completed that work. and then an overview of Paramedics Plus proposal. So the first I just want to review with you is the project preparation. So the review of our current system, it actually began around mid-2011. Some of you may or were on the council at that time when we presented on our system design as it currently exists and why we have the emergency ambulance service designed the way we do in Sioux Falls. I encourage you, that was, I believe, May 9th or 11th, that right in that time frame where we gave that presentation, and it is on SIRE. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in understanding more about our system design, I believe that was a fairly well-received overview at that time. We also then initiated an internal audit as we were looking at our design and where we need to move forward when we were working on, in 2012, how we need to tackle this project. We decided an internal audit would be a good idea, and so we engaged in that internal audit during the 2013 cycle. We also wanted to assure that we had as much input from internal subject matter expertise as possible. And so from there, it was determined that we needed to develop a project team around this, a group of folks that could advise and help lead the efforts in moving this along and be able to inform all of us working together on how the best way forward and what the components need to be from that internal city project team, and I'll talk about those folks. So then we also researched what was best practice in conducting an RFP, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The internal audit, just to remind you, concluded, and I quote, "To give you a sense of our current process, based on the research for this audit, we believe that no change needs to be made to the EMS system design in Sioux Falls, that it is considered high-performance model." We definitely agreed with the audit recommendations, and then we also agreed that we should be hiring a national expert or consultant nationally to help advise us in this work. So who was the project team? It composed of myself as a project sponsor, Julie Charbonneau as project manager, Chad Olson, REMSA board chair, Dr. Jay Fitch, who was our national consultant, Dave Fifley, our city attorney, Jim Sedaris, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue chief, Dr. Jeff Luther, who is our REMSA medical director, Alicia Kalura, assistant director from our health department, Scott Rust, our purchasing manager, Sandy Friends, public health manager in the health department, Jeff Helm from Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, and Matt Newman from the purchasing department. So, City Council, your participation in this. So again, here's my date for you. So it was on May 9th in 2011 where we did that system overview. Then we also brought to you approval request for the consultant, Dr. Jay Fitch and Associates. That was approved on December 17th of 2013. Councilor Sagers, you attended a public meeting that we held for the public, and that was on May 28th of 2014. And then we conducted briefings, either in, might have been one of them in public services, but the majority of them were in informational meeting on February 11th of 14, in May of 14, again in September, and then in November. And then as Councilor Karski noted in his recusal, he served on our scoring team. So we also then engaged stakeholders. That was considered one of the important components of this work, and it was one of the deliverables of Dr. Fitch when he came. And those were conducted over numerous meetings when he came to town to do his work. So we met with the existing ambulance provider, Rural Metro. He also met with city council members, a couple of you for sure, I think Councilor Anderson, you were one of those. City council staff, legal staff, our city auditors, REMSA medical director, met with our local health systems, both Sanford and Avera. At Sanford, he met with Vice President Monica Huber and Vice President Orlin Cheddar, and then met with Avera's CEO, Dr. Dave Kapaska. and then also of our heart hospitals, CEO John Soderholm. Metro Communications, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, REMSA Board, and REMSA Medical Board. So what did we learn from those meetings that were conducted? The key messages that came from those were that clinical quality is paramount. There were some, one of the things that they talked quite a bit about was an example, and that was our CARES registry. That's one of the things that Julie explains in that session we did in May of 2011 that I think is really helpful to understand how you start to look at outcomes and impact in the work that you do rather than the outputs and the process of the care that you provide, but it's really looking at what you do, how do you gain improved outcomes for the patients that you serve. It's no longer in healthcare really good enough to just measure your outputs and the processes that you do, but really you have to be looking at, are those processes actually yielding the results that you want and providing the optimal care that you need for your patients. And so the CARES registry is one of those ways that we are able to actually do measurement within the EMS system and understand how we're able to see results. And so we have a very good survival rate in Sioux Falls. 45% of individuals with a survivable cardiac arrest survive to hospital discharge compared to 33 nationally. That's an excellent measure. So that was one of the things that our stakeholders said is absolutely paramount. Safety and response time performance does matter. We use safety along with that response time. So things that they wanted included were to be using the traffic light control system that fire rescue uses right now, that the ambulance providers should be using that as well. And so that was actually written into the RFP. Another example that's not listed here would be, assuring that work shifts are such that we prevent the paramedic fatigue that might occur. So some of those types of things around safety and also response time performance. It was wanting to be assured that there was high quality EMS, that they were able to demonstrate the kind of quality that would be able to have them integrate into our existing system that we have in our community. We are very fortunate in Sioux Falls, in our community, have such a sophisticated system of care. And what was really exciting to the stakeholders was looking for that ambulance service that could match that level of sophistication and perhaps even bring some new thinking to our community around quality service that we can provide. So that was another item that was considered a high priority. Next was user fees were preferable to a subsidy to achieve the clinical service levels required. We are fortunate in our size community. We're just the right size community, and we believe and have met and evaluated that over this contract period we'll continue to be the right size community to not require a subsidy for ambulance service. So they can be a profitable company where they can generate enough revenues through their reimbursement. So it's a difference between charges. So their pricing and their charges are one piece of the pie, but how they're actually reimbursed is where they are going to be able to generate the revenue that they need to cover their costs for service. But the analysis shows that they are an ambulance service should be able to be profitable and provide a high level of quality at the same time in our community. And last was maximize inclusivity of the applicant pool. When we met with the mayor and also with Councilor Karski, it was requested that we fashion this RFP, and the proposals come in allowing as much opportunity to be applying for this opportunity and to be part of this pool of proposals. So we did take some measures to be able to assure inclusivity was considered as well. So what else did we do? We looked at what is best practice out there in terms of design of the RFP, and we followed the American Ambulance Association's recommendations. They actually are the largest trade association for ambulance service and providers in the country. Their members provide ambulance service to 75% of the nation's population, and they really do have the standard as far as developing and executing a request for proposal. So really the industry best practice is to design a performance-based contract. And so then that's where you start with your RFP, is really with that in mind. And if you design that RFP correctly, you will yield the results in that proposal that then can be used as the basis for your contract for services. So an RFP based on a high-performance EMS model, it yields a specific set of commitments, and that's what was important in what Dr. Fitch helped us to do, was write that RFP so that we could get the commitments that we needed, not just for being able to agree to the minimums or the core requirements, but to be able to well articulate the higher level of commitment that could help us differentiate the proposals to who was going to be the best proposal moving forward. So these are just the categories, and I'm not going to read through these, but I will tell you on the next couple of slides that these categories that were in the AAA recommendations are what we subscribe to in our RFP. So requirements in our request for proposal included, things you would obviously expect to see, that we would want to well understand their commitment to response times, that how are they going to provide equipment and supply requirements to meet the needs of our community. What will they be committing to for staffing levels of certification and licensure? How do they describe their clinical performance to meet the approved medical standards? How do they provide comprehensive quality improvement and compliance activities? How are their dispatch performance standards yielding the results needed? And how are they overseeing those deployment protocols? How are they assuring accurate and timely reporting? And then also, how are they measuring customer and community satisfaction? So those were the core criteria, and these were the competitive criteria. They had that minimum that they had to meet, and they certainly had to describe how they were going to do that. But then they also had to describe how they were going to be able to do a higher level of commitment for each of these areas: commitment to quality, clinical quality, operations management, commitment to the employees, management administration, and EMS system and community. So under quality, commitment to clinical quality, that might include things like their benchmarking, medical direction, continuing education. Under their operations management, that includes how they describe their dispatch, how they describe the vehicles and equipment that they will bring to Sioux Falls and utilize, their deployment planning and strategies. Under personnel, really wanting to understand a lot about their field supervision and how they're going to assure the supervision needed to be providing that oversight in the field. Their work schedules, internal risk management, loss control, workforce engagement, et cetera. Management and administration will be describing their key personnel. And then EMS systems and a community is working closely with the health systems, as well as how are they supporting and improving the first response system. How are they going to work with fire? How will they work with the community to improve community education and awareness? So here's how the points were allocated, and this table summarizes those amongst the various categories. The point allocations you'll see are reflective of the stakeholder input, so you can see where the commitment to clinical quality, operations management garnering a higher number of points of the total of 1,700. You can see also that commitment to EMS system and community garnered a higher number of points. You'll see that the core requirements and competitive criteria are really, they agree, they are able to provide an exception if they had an exception to their agreement of that. What that means is that they were not scored because those were just the minimum. You had to be able to meet that just to get in past that stage, and then the remaining where there's points allocated is where those were the competitive scoring areas. So you can see Price was also scored as well. It was a total of a possible 300 points of the total of 1,700 points. Just so you're aware, there is the price weighting typically falls anywhere from 10 to 25% of the total scoring. When you look at our requests for proposals that are typically done, we were at 18%, so that's kind of in the middle range there. So our timeline, we drafted the request for proposal April through July, and then purchasing issued it July 18th, and then the proposer conference was held on August 28th, and then we received 4 proposals on the deadline of October 9th. We received 4 proposals from, including AMR, American Medical Response, from MedStar, from Paramax Plus, and from Rural Metro. These are in alphabetical order, in case you're wondering. It wasn't in terms of when they came in. So next, we're going to talk through a little bit of the process with the scoring team. And this included City Councilor Karski that we talked about earlier, Lori Popkes, who's a Deputy Chief Nursing Officer at Avera McKinnon, Monica Huber is a Senior Vice President with Sanford Health, and Daniel Osmek, he is a Director of Emergency Services in Forsyth County, and Dwayne Ginder, he is an EMS Manager at Parkview Health in Indiana. Wendy Lee is an Associate Director of EMS in Dorchester County, South Carolina, and Kevin Smith is the Director of EMS, Department of Health in Ontario, Canada. So in addition to this group who is assisting them in their work was Jay Fitch and Chip Sovic from the consulting firm Fitch & Associates. They served as support staff to help guide the process along. Julie Charbonneau and a REMSA board member, Aaron Hurley, were also observing the scoring and process. And then Matt Newman from purchasing, and also Scott Russ. Scott Russ was actually quite an involved person with the on those day and a half. He really kind of led the work for that day and a half that they worked on this. And then Matt Newman helped with the score tabulation. So the team was well vetted to assure they were disinterested parties, all of them. They had to sign agreements and attest to the fact that they were disinterested and that they did not have a conflict of interest from serving. They were ideal. We wanted to have local representation, and that was another request from the mayor and Councilor Karski, was to assure that some of the scoring team was local, perhaps a mix of both. And so that's where we chose to have 3 local and 4 that were industry experts. But we got a really nice package of the 2 of the 3 that were local really had extensive knowledge of EMS in our community. So we feel, and obviously Karski's knowledge of our EMS system is pretty good as well, given his serving on the city council. So one of the things I want to convey, there's been a lot of mention that I had the opportunity to adjust the scores, to change the scores, to do things that I needed to do after the scoring was complete. And that is simply not correct. I had no ability or opportunity, nor would I have considered changing any of the scores from the scoring team. The scoring team themselves didn't even see the scores as well, and any scores that I did see were in a file, an Excel file that I could not edit in any way, and that's kept with both Fitch & Associates and with the city purchasing officer department. They have both Excel files that are matching, and they are keeping those for purposes of documentation. So what the scoring selection team was able to do was they didn't see the points, but they were able to still do the ranking. And And so what they would do is, and I'm not going to go into great detail on this unless you ask a question, and then I'm going to bring Julie Charbonneau up here because she can just so well articulate this. But they would simply put a section of criteria up on the whiteboard, and then they would find within each of the proposals the elements that where they described meeting that particular section of criteria. So everybody on the scoring team split up into partners, and they'd look through one of these types of proposals and find what they needed, and then they would share that with the rest of the group, and then they would put that all up there and they'd say, okay, now score. And they would score, it would be either that they meet the minimum, or it was a marginal response, or it was a good response, or a better response, or a best response. And they would put that in, and then they would collect that one sheet, and then they'd go on to the next section. So they didn't see how the points were allocated, but they certainly were giving their input onto who was meeting the criteria and to what level were they exceeding the competitive criteria and to what degree. So I hope that makes some sense to help answer and describe the process that they were engaged in. It was rigorous, it was intense, but they came away from that very impressed. If you talk to any of them, they would tell you and have been very open about talking about how impressed they were with how this was structured. If you are looking for information yourself on this, you have the RFP in an attachment on SIRE. On page 12, it does very well list out the process as well and gives you a good indication of how this all was handled. So here's the scoring that came through that you'll see. I gotta get a drink here. So in the end, each proposal received an average score. And then after that was all completed, then they scored price. And the scoring selection team wasn't involved in that because that's an objective score that doesn't need to be ranked, if you will, good, better, best. There's specific weighting that's done for the pricing, and so the purchasing department and Dr. Fitch did that and presented that information after they worked on that together. So then that is between the average score based on the competitive criteria and then the price points yields the total score. So you can see how that then in total, Paramedics Plus was the high scoring proposal, 1,348. AMR was 1,317, Rural Metro 641, and MedStar 602. So you're aware 6 of the 7 panel members scored Paramedics Plus the highest. And I also have to tell you that Counselor Karski scored Paramedics Plus the highest as well, as one of the 7, or one of the 6 of the 7. He didn't know that for the longest time, by the way. So, all right. So further evaluation that occurred. Once each of the scores was tallied, and then the average score was calculated. Again, like I said, the scoring selection team was not aware of the scoring specifics in any way. Once that was collected, that was presented to me, and then the finance department, actually Tracy Turbach, received financial packages from each of the 4 proposals, and then he had a set of items that he had to review to look at their financial strength and ability to serve this community as well. And then City Attorney Fifley also received some legal documents, and then he did his own review and had a set of criteria that he had to review as well, and then give me his review as well as Tracy Turbach doing that. So I received then all 3 of those. So again, then there's been this question of why me? You know, why is Jill Franken, the health director, presenting this recommendation to you? Truly, we really thought about that long and hard. What is the best, who should best be presenting this to you? Well, when we started looking at all the elements that have to come together and then everything has to be looked at in total, that when you start getting that information all collected together, it really does create an objective set of information But I still have to then take a look at it and make sure that when you look at the finance package, the legal package, the scoring package, and then the proposals themselves, someone has to make that recommendation to you, who is the best and who should you be considering for a contract. So that's often the case or the responsibility of a health director in communities. And so we took the recommendation from Dr. Fitch that that should be me here in this case. So this again goes through the roles, the things that I talked about on the previous slide. It just gives you a little bit more of that in bullet form. I won't go through it again. But on 11-4, after all this review, and I have to also back up just a little bit. One of the reasons that I didn't the day that I got all those documents, because, you know, we had a high scoring proposal of Paramedics Plus. But did you remember seeing how close Paramedics Plus was to AMR? Well, that's highly unusual in these RFP processes. They're designed to give you a little bit more distance between each of the proposals and scoring. And so when it was so close, I really felt I had an obligation to really review each of the proposals and make sure I felt really good about the recommendation that I'd be providing you. And so that's why I took a couple, 3 days to accomplish that. Thank you. So again, on 11-4 then, I myself made the recommendation to you, the City Council, in a meeting that we had that day, the recommendation that we'd be entering into a notice of intent to award to Paramedics Plus. Now all of a sudden I'm not advancing. So while we're getting this to work, again, I will talk a little bit about the leadership team for Paramedics Plus. Paramedics Plus is a LLC, and Ron Schwartz is the president of Paramedics Plus. He is actually has some. He actually is from this area, and actually, well, he's not from originally this area, but he lived in Vermilion for a period of time and attended USD. Mark Postma is the vice president of Paramedics Plus, and he actually is a Sioux Falls native. And his folks actually live in Harrisburg now. Or actually, no, they live in Sioux Falls. That's where they live. And then Mike Bureau, who is recently hired as the Chief Operating Officer for the Sioux Falls operation. He actually moved here, I think it was in the last week, and he's here in the audience. And you want to raise your hand, Mike? He and his wife have just moved here. They live in Florida. They're just moving from Florida, but they're from Michigan. And it sounds like his wife is really excited to be here. So Paramedics Plus are a sole provider in multiple geographic diverse regions. And they serve a population of just under 3 million people. They have annual transports of over 277,000. They provide both 911 and emergency service. Some of the places communities where they serve is Tyler and Waco, Texas, Pinellas County, Florida, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Alameda County, California. So here's some of they are one of the areas that just really was created them in being such a high scoring proposal was their quality performance and their use of the Baldrige criteria in performance improvement and quality management. And that is really, when you say Baldrige criteria to people in healthcare, well, and even in other systems, but in healthcare especially, that is very well regarded. They also have CAS accreditation in every community they serve, and their Florida operation is triple accredited with 2 other accreditations, and I can let you know what those are if you want those acronyms. They
two Paramedics Plus communities that they serve are among the top 5 in the U.S. when comparing cardiac survival rates amongst large urban EMS systems, and that was reported out in USA Today. And they have committed to implementing the Baldrige criteria in Sioux Falls. So again, also measurement, benchmarking, those are important components of quality management and quality improvement and quality performance. Cardiac survival rates of 41%. If you remember, nationally the average is 33. Patient surveys, 95% satisfaction. Employee satisfaction, 89%. Nationally recognized for their quality improvement. Leaders in clinical advancement. That their key performance indicators and measures exceed the requirements that we put in the request for proposal. I also contacted a couple of EMS directors in communities where they're currently serving. So I contacted Gary Brewer in Three Rivers Ambulance Authority in Fort Wayne, as well as Alex Briscoe in Alameda County. Here's just a synopsis of the comments that I received from them. We are so pleased with how they have become part of the community rather than just running a business. They are very patient care driven and their quality is very high. What you see is what you get. They do what they say they will do. And when you read through their proposal, you will see if they and when they do what they say they are going to do, we are going to be well served in Sioux Falls. So their deployment strategies are really very significant as well. They meet very stringent response time standards. They use an award-winning Pulse. It's a software system that to monitor, it's a technology to monitor system performance real time. They have a director of corporate employment that will interface with local operations daily. Daily, they will be looking at their deployment strategies and adjusting those as necessary. And then they use, it's called Tableau, and it's a dashboard software to facilitate deployment analytics. They also are very committed to employees based on their proposal. And I have to tell you, all of the proposers accepted retaining local workforce, and Paramedics Plus was certainly in there as well, of all 4 of them. They have a detailed employee engagement plan for recognition and satisfaction. They have a proprietary management training program. They use a Just Culture model, and Just Culture model encourages employees to report safety and risk issues. It's an incident reporting system. And then they're also investing $65,000 in a Zoll Safe Force intensive driving program. Safe Force, when I had to look it up, it's a proven solution to reduce aggressive driving and improve safety. They are also committing to an infusion of $1.7 million capital investment in our EMS system. They are bringing in a fleet of 8 new ambulances. Their level of support that they'll be bringing in will meet 150% of peak demand. We required in the RFP 130%. To be able to meet 130%, they're going to be at 150%. They're bringing in all new equipment and including power stretchers and bariatric stretchers, which are going to help for their staff and patients. They, from a financial perspective, are solid. They have a working capital of over $323 million. They have over $422 million in unrestricted equity. They're a financially sound organization. So here's some things that are in addition that are from a community perspective. One of the areas that I was wanting to make sure I understood was, where are they at in being able to provide any kind of write-offs or adjustments or charity care? And they do have actually system-wide a charity care policy where someone who's uninsured can apply for charity care, and if they don't meet the requirements of their charity care, then they can also request a sliding fee discount if they're uninsured. Very similar to Falls Community Health and what we do. They will adjust based on their income and slide that fee accordingly, which is huge in our community and with our population that we serve, given the fact that we have, you know, just at Falls Community Health alone, we have around 7,000 uninsured that we serve, and we do serve quite a large number of the uninsured in our community. They also have a comprehensive, their risk and risk plan, their loss control plan is extensive that you'll see in the proposal. They'll provide annual dispatch training at no cost. They're very committed to customer satisfaction and will work on mutual aid agreements with our surrounding EMS systems. So next steps. In summary, our project management approach has been highly inclusive. It's been collaborative. It's been using local and national subject matter experts and resources to execute an objective process for the citizens of Sioux Falls. The aim is an exclusive franchise agreement assuring a best practice, high-quality ambulance service will be provided in Sioux Falls using no tax subsidy, but will rather be self-sustaining. So I bring forward to you the recommendation for Paramedics Plus for that exclusive franchise agreement. So next steps will be on this evening will be first reading. Second reading will be next Tuesday, and then contract implementation will be on May 21st. I would like to thank, there's a lot of folks in the room here that have been working really hard on this. And so the project team is represented here. This was an intense project with City Attorney's Office and the Finance Department and the Purchasing Department. The REMSA board has put in a lot of time and extra meetings to meet with us on this. REMSA Medical Board has discussed this in detail in several of their meetings. The stakeholders have to really thank them for their time and their energy and their recommendations. Paramedics Plus have to thank them because they have actually put in a lot of work already in preparing for serving this community. So many of them are here today, and I thank them, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Director Franken. A lot of good work being done there. Questions from the council? We'll start with Councilman Jameson.
Jill, on the last page there, the 5-year franchise agreement, is the 5-year a normal term compared to other cities? I think, what is it, 1.7 million they're doing as a capital investment. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, is 5-year a normal term or is it 10?
There was a lot of conversation around that and what is the best route to go. And that's why we landed on the earned extensions, so that if the contract is being satisfactorily met, then they can have an additional annual earned extension for up to 6 additional years. So then, Councilor Jameson, it could be up to 11 years that they'd be serving under that contract with those earned extensions. So it's a good question, and we had a lot of conversation about that. I believe that within this time period here, we're going to be looking at how the growth of Sioux Falls is impacting EMS in our community, and they're like what we did. We'll probably even have to be a little bit even more aggressive in looking at our design before the end of this 11 years, but we feel really good about where we're going to be throughout this time period if they do satisfactorily serve that full period of time.
Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Jill, I have a few questions.
Sure.
Excuse me. During your presentation, you talked about the scoring package, but you also mentioned financial package, legal package. How many packages are there, and can you say something about those?
Sure. They presented us with, well, this document is the proposal itself for Paramedics Plus. Then they had a set of appendices and exhibits that was a whole separate document that went along with that. And then, yes, they had to present a separate financial package and then a separate, all the legal documents that have to be reviewed for their legal and financial fitness.
So, so basically, I don't want to get too picky here, but there were 3 packages that were really, okay, okay. And the scoring package, we had a special scoring team.
Correct.
And then we also had this other group of people, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, project team composition. I guess I'm wondering, this project team composition, wouldn't they have a great deal of knowledge? Why weren't some of them involved in the scoring package? It seems to me that we have the scoring being done by 4 people out of state in other parts of the country, and then we have somebody representing Avera and Sanford, and then Dean Carsgate. I guess I'm kind of surprised by that. I mean, how much information did the scoring people get? I mean, how long were they involved in doing this?
The scoring team received the packages in advance, a few days in advance, and were given several days to then review the proposals. They only got the proposal and the exhibits, so that's what they reviewed, which is a lot.
Okay, yeah, it is.
And so that's what they received in advance. And then they spent that day and a half. The full day was scoring the proposals, and then a half day with presentations. And so that was...
So a half day of presentation. So each of the ambulance companies were able to give a presentation
Correct.
then, huh? Okay. Okay.
Okay, Counselor Staggers, I'll come back to you. Counselor Kiley?
Okay.
We just had a follow-up question regarding the extensions that could be earned. Are those in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year increments, or how are they?
1 year increments.
Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Staggers?
Yeah, so once again, to clarify, 2 days for the scoring team to...
They had 1 full day and a little over a half day for the second day.
Okay. I was kind of surprised about the total scores that each ambulance company received. Paramedics Plus got 1,348, and then AMR got 1,317, Rural Metro got 641, and MedStar got 602. Two of them did extremely well, and then 2, including our present ambulance company, didn't do as well in comparison speaking.
That's correct.
I guess I'm still not sure why these Paramedics Plus and AMR did so well in comparison to 2 local companies.
Because they wrote exceptional proposals, and the 2 low scoring did not.
So it's writing proposals. They
It
did a
is-
good job.
Well, the information that they provided in their proposals not only was well written, but it also showed evidence of the competitive criteria that they were scored on. So they were able to demonstrate what they did, how they did it, why they did it, how they measure that, and the results of their measurement. And that's why they were able to score so high in the competitive criteria in several of the areas.
But there's a couple areas where Paramedics Plus and AMR didn't really do all that great. Price points. Paramedics Plus has got the lowest of anybody. Lower than AMR, lower than Rural Metro, lower than MedsStar. I mean, to me, price is a pretty important thing. And that's something, hey, these are some numbers that, you can kind of...
Can you give me some reference as to why you think price is important? I mean, can you give me a question that I can answer?
Well, price was never really that important in the scoring, it doesn't look like. Now, going back here to the scoring, proposed pricing, total points 300.
Correct.
Okay, operations management was more than that, 350. Commitment to clinical quality, 350. But out of 1,700 points, price was only 300 points. And this is well, very important. And here we have the winner having the worst when it comes to price.
I think the word price is the word that I have to elaborate on a little bit here. So first off, just to remind you, there's no subsidy to the city. We are not paying anything for this ambulance service. We're issuing an exclusive franchise agreement with no subsidy. So that's one point I have to make. The second is that when you talk about prices, they put in what their charge structure will be. So, you know, I've come to you every year and I've talked about our budget at Falls Community Health, and it's very similar to an ambulance budget or structure in terms of revenue. And so you have your charge. You have to look at the prevailing rates in the community. You have to look at what is going to maximize your revenues in terms of your charge, because you charge to Medicare, you charge to Medicaid, you charge to third-party payers, and you charge to those who are not able to pay. So you set those charges to be able to cover your costs. But that also is not considering the fact that you're going to have discounts applied and you're not necessarily going to get in reimbursement what you charge. And so you also have to look at the reimbursement strategy, being able to assure that you're going to be able to cover your costs with all the reimbursables that you get. And so that's where you set. So you have to be careful on how you set your price. But that's how the scoring, if someone set their price extremely low, probably not even able to maybe really be realistic in this market, that is, you know, that's something you have to take a look at as well, because you want to be able to maximize your revenues when you're looking at how you're setting your charges to cover your costs. And so that's why you would see the charge structures as they are.
Okay, Councilor Staggers, I'm going to come back to you again.
If I can just ask
I have,
in response to
I'll
this.
come right back to you, okay? But I have another counselor that had a question. Councilor Alfing?
I had somewhat of an idea of what was going on here, only because I know we had spent so doggone much time on it, and you guys have spent a lot of time on it. I want to congratulate you on the process that you put together here, and that what the outcome. I mean, it's obvious we didn't choose the lowest bidder. Mm-hmm. What we did was we chose the quality over the less loss, less money, if you will. And I think that's very important for the city of Sioux Falls to have somebody proven and somebody who knows where they're coming from, et cetera. I'm very interested in this process scoring, where the average score for all the other things was much higher, much higher. Saying that, community involvement, different things like that are as important sometimes as price when it comes to selecting this type of a long-term investment. I had a couple other just questions. I thought the point allocation was good because you gave credit to doing things that are either pass-fail basically, or you had an amount to them, and kind of weighted it. And like I said, sometimes price is not the most important thing, especially when you have 10 different criteria you're looking at. Quick question on Dr. Fitch, MD or PhD?
PhD.
PhD. I was wondering about that, okay, what that situation was. Basically, what we've done is said here, you said that the core requirements, everybody did pretty well on the core requirements.
They met them.
They met them, and that's where we're at. So what it came down is where the rubber met the road is what we went from a stripped down Chevrolet, and did we get to a Cadillac, or did we get to a Buick, or did we stay with a Chevrolet?
Correct.
And I congratulate you for going to the Cadillac at this point, because I think it looks like we've done our homework on here and done a good job of differentiating them in a very quantitative manner. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, before I go back to Councilor Staggers, Councilor Fama?
Thank you. I just wanted to dispute the Cadillac sort of reference there.
Sure.
We're not talking about bells and whistles.
Right.
We're talking about public safety here.
Correct.
We're talking about, putting our loved ones in an ambulance, and,
Yes.
their lives are in these folks' hands. So I understand, I appreciate the comparison, but that's not what it's about for me, and I don't think it's what it's about for the folks that elected us to be here to participate in this process. We're here about public safety, and I echo Councilor Rolfing's congratulations, and I appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this, and that, you know, the depth and the breadth of the knowledge that is behind that proposal, each of those 4 proposals, is paramount to just about anything else, and I appreciate what you've done.
Thank you.
Counselor Jameson.
Thank you. You're right, price is not the bottom line, but Jill, do you have a comparison of cost of services? Say, for instance, just a regular routine ambulance pickup. Is there a way to quantify that for us? I just don't even know what it costs to have that service.
Well, I was looking at, it's not going to be able to be you're not going to be able to compare to our current rates because it's a different pricing structure, okay? So just keep that in mind. But when we looked at the top 2, for example, they're for a bundled emergency service, so that's a 911 service. That Paramedics Plus proposal was $1,150. AMRs was $1,006. And then, for example, rural metros was $1,092. So they're not too far off from each other.
Okay, very good. That's what I need. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
Counselor Staggers.
Yeah, Jill?
I don't have it on my.
Oh, you don't have net
Nope,
stars?
I don't.
Oh, okay. I guess also this points allocation, it's just experience providing similar services. You get 100 points. Why so low? I mean, that seems so important.
So what's your
On the
question?
RFP process, points allocation number 2, experience providing similar services.
Well, that
I
was
mean, I guess
really
I'm just-
just being, that was, you know, when you look at being able to provide the experience they have in providing similar services, that's pretty close to the core requirements and pretty close to the minimum is having that experience doing that. Where you really got in, that was, and you notice that's not in the competitive criteria, that's outside of that. So they could earn points for having some relevant experience, but the bulk of the weight was in the competitive criteria. And that was based on, Councilor Stakers, that was based on the stakeholder input and those items that I shared with you around really making sure quality was paramount.
Can you say something, or maybe Dave can say something, about the Paramedics Plus being an LLC? Is that can you say something about that?
Counselor, that would be a limited liability company.
Yeah.
And they are under the East Texas Medical Center arm in terms of ownership structure, and they're kind of a separate LLC underneath that. But as Jill indicated, the operating capital, the financial is all there. In terms of, we have a $1 million performance bond that is part of this contract in terms of if for some reason there is a default, we would need to take over as a city that service. We would have $1 million at our immediate disposal in order to take over the ambulances and do all that if there's some issue. And then also, they do have insurance provisions of, I believe, $5 million insuring us, and more importantly, they're indemnifying us from anything with that policy for up to $5 million. So financially, the LLC is not that concerned.
Okay, so it covers all their other operations, their other paramedic plus operations too. There's no Paramedics Plus, a little subdivision, limited liability corporation, or.
No,
Okay.
in terms of, again, we have the $5 million in indemnification coverage. We have the $1 million performance bond. And then they are also backed ultimately by the East Texas Medical Center. So that is.
That doesn't have any bearing, does it?
Yes, it does. They're part of that whole system.
They're part of that, but that's not an LLC, is it, or not?
No, that's a nonprofit, but a nonprofit entity can have a for-profit LLC operating underneath it, which is what is going on here. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining it very well.
As far as liability goes, that East Texas wouldn't have any responsibility, would they?
In terms of liability, Counselor, the $6 million that I just relayed to you would be more than sufficient to cover us. We've gone through with the legal team and also with our risk manager in particular, and we've analyzed certainly other contracts across the country, and we're very comfortable with that level of coverage and an immediate bond if we need it. We're not concerned at all in terms of their status being an LLC versus any other company. A corporation would have that same protection in terms of the most you could go after is their own assets that are in their name. You couldn't go after the personal investors.
Oh, no.
I believe every entity that proposed here was some type of separate legal entity. We didn't have a John Smith personally doing ambulance service as.
Yeah, that's just what I wanted to know. But if I can ask...
One more question.
One more question. When it comes to the contract here in Sioux Falls, they will have a monopoly on emergency 911 service, but when it comes to the transport from from one hospital to another, they will also have that monopoly?
It would cover emergency and non-emergency calls, both originating and culminating within the city limits, Counselor.
Okay. And I know why we're giving them that, but I guess I think it's unnecessary to give a monopoly just to transport a patient from one hospital to another. Those hospitals can make the decision as to who they want to transport instead of having it mandated by the city.
Two of the stakeholders, as you saw on the slide, were both hospital systems as well as the Heart Hospital, and they were 100% on board with this particular structure, Counselor. And they had 2 panel members on the scoring panel as well. They are 100% behind this.
Okay, so we can get a statement from them in writing that they're in favor of going ahead and having no choice when it comes to transporting patients?
They have both agreed to honor the exclusive operating area as indicated in the RFP. They volunteered 2 high-level executives, one from each hospital system, to come and help score it. If they had any concerns, believe me, they would have voiced them by now. And no, they're 100% on board.
Excuse me, Counselor Kiley?
Thank you very much. And I would just like to remind everybody that this request for proposal or RFP design followed American Ambulance Association recommendations. So this isn't something that our group here, our project team, just thought up on their own, but they're using established experts in the field to come up with this RFP design, best practice for RFPs, and our national consultant obviously played a key role in this whole process too. Regarding the points allocation, or the rubric as we're more often to refer to a scoring system of this type in education, Counselor Staggers, you and I have graded many student papers, and we often have a rubric that we've established beforehand. And that's a very comprehensive approach to scoring papers, so it takes into account different aspects of the assignment, or in this case, what we would like the company to deliver. And so obviously you're going to score high in some areas, and some other areas you might score a little lower, but just because you score in one area low in one area doesn't necessarily doom your paper to failure. You have to take into consideration the overall scoring. And I found this process very objective, very time-consuming, obviously, thought-provoking. And I commend you and the team and everybody involved in this process. It's quite an undertaking.
Thank you.
Counselor Staggers, do you have more questions?
Well, I was wondering, is it possible to get the points that each of these companies scored on each of these categories?
I would have to check on that, whether that's, yes? Okay, yes, I'm told we can release that.
Okay. Are we still going to vote on this next
Yes.
Tuesday?
It's on the agenda for next Tuesday.
I mean, for such an important agreement to come up with, I wish we had as much information as possible, and I appreciate, Jill, you coming here this afternoon, but, you know,
I think that's something we can bring up at the first reading, Counselor, as far as that timeline, but what is set right now is set, so it would have to require a change
Well,
by the council to do that. So
well,
it's now been,
Lori, this is no difficult thing to do, really, is it?
Well,
We discussed this, pardon me, but we discussed this last week as well, and I believe the majority of us at that point then agreed that we need to proceed with this process. And this isn't the first discussion we've had on this issue, Councilor Staggers. We've had other discussions, maybe not publicly, but we have discussed this. We do have a timeline frame too. This contract has to be initiated in May. And that also means that the individual that receives it has a lot of preparatory work that they need to complete between now and then. 3+ months isn't a great amount of time to get everything in order.
But I think, Jill, you said it had to be done by the end of February, isn't that right? So we could delay it a week at least.
I don't think I said that.
once again, this can be brought up
If I
during first
indicated
reading.
anything as such, I am highly recommending that we move this to second reading next Tuesday.
Once again, you can bring that up as a question at first reading, and the council will decide on that. Okay,
good.
that's the way that has to be, Kermit, and you know that. Excuse me.
Well, no, it
Councilor
doesn't have to be at all that way.
Yes.
It doesn't
Okay.
have to be.
Councilor Offenbach?
I just wanted, I was in the meeting, but I made a note to myself, and I'm looking back at one of the early slides that Jill presented, the ambulance system overview that the council received on the 9th of May in 2011 is available on siouxfalls.org. I would urge everyone to watch it. I'm going to watch it again. I was here, but I'm going to watch it again. I think that's really valuable in terms of where we're headed with this conversation. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
So,
Any other questions before I go back to Dr. Staggers?
Jill, can you get that for us tomorrow, those points and so forth, so we can have as much time as possible?
I'll do my
Okay.
best. I'll work with the purchasing department. I'm assuming they just have to put it in a certain format and then get it sent out.
Thanks a lot.
Any other questions? Thank you, Director
Thank you very
Franken.
much. Thank you.
Does he have?
Mr. Chair? I would move that we recess into executive session to consult with legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to South Dakota Codified Law 1-25-23.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I need a motion to adjourn? No? Okay. Then we are adjourned, and no, we're moving into a recess. Okay, excuse me.